Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring to you the kinds of topics that we think will intrigue you, inspire you, allow you to see possibilities that you may not have seen before, and pursue that thing that we do in Rotary, which is service above self. The Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley is one of 36,000 clubs around the world within Rotary International, 1.2 million people of all descriptions working to make the world a better place. In our club, we have a special interest in innovation, education, and entrepreneurship. And so when we find folks who allow us to kind of think innovatively about service and about how we think about our settings and our discussions and our democracy, that sounds like a pretty good thing that we can pursue. So our speaker, Dr. Stephanie Frank-Singer, is somebody who's going to be able to dive into the details in great detail with us for this, and I'm very excited for her to be part of this. Dr. Singer has studied math and computer science at Yale and Stanford. She completed her PhD at New York University and is part of the team, part of the faculty at Portland State University in the Center for Public Service in the Hatfield School of Government. We are very happy to have you with us, Dr. Singer. Thank you, and I hand it over to you.
Well, it is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I want to first of all thank all of you for your service. My service has, for most of my adult life, been to democracy in the United States, and I'll be talking about the United States today. I have some experience in the ivory tower and also in the political muck and mud. I spent 10 years in politics in Philadelphia, starting in my local Democratic Party committee and working my way up to getting elected citywide to Commissioner of Elections, where I served for 4 years. So any question is fair game. You cannot scare me. And I also want to say that though my background is partisan, I am first and foremost a defender of, believer in democracy. I have discovered that in order to get things done in this country, it is very powerful to work within a party. So I absolutely respect the nonpartisan position of the Rotary Club, and am happy to take any question. All right, so first of all, in case you get distracted during the talk, I just wanted to give you the punchline right away. The punchline is stop reading the international or national news every day. Use the time you save to work on a project with your neighbors. This is the best thing you can do right now for democracy in the United States. So the first question is democracy actually at risk? And if so, what are the symptoms? And since we only have 2 live people, I'll ask you to answer not in the chat, but just to speak up. So
my first thought on that is that the sense that someone who disagrees is an other, and less part of the larger team that is trying to figure out something difficult, and more of a sense of enemy is something that can put a democracy at risk.
Yes, I completely agree. One of the things that I have seen happen over the past decade is a real, let's not argue about how long it's been going on. But there has been a real erosion in the sense that we are playing the same game on the same field. And that is truly dangerous. I agree. That is definitely a symptom. If I think about how many friends I have who are not in my party and how hard I have to work to keep up the friendships that are across party lines, it is depressing and worrying. I agree. Anything else? Any other symptoms people want to mention?
I think when people stop being able to talk to each other in a civil way, or without dragging the extreme point of view into the conversation, mostly sort of reiterating what you hear on one or another of the news channels. I won't name names, but there are at least one on each side of the issue. And the when people become so politicized in their thinking that they don't have original thinking, that is concerning.
So I see two things that, well, actually really at base, one thing which is a good thing, but which has actually, I don't think we've figured out how to recover from. And that is transparency, which I'm a big fan of transparency. And at the same time, having served on a board of 3 people in a state where any meeting of the majority of the members has to be publicly noticed. So serving on a board of 3 people where I literally could not have a conversation with either of my colleagues, a conversation where we might work things out or talk honestly about our differences or anything like that. I see that we have not yet figured out how to have both transparency and to have public figures in public discourse who, I have too many negatives in this sentence. I'd like to have public figures in public discourse who can say, oh, I see that point, you know, I could move a bit, or, you know, I said this, but maybe that's not quite right. Maybe what I really mean is this other thing. It's very, very hard to do that when everybody is watching and when anything you say can be taken out of context and just weaponized against you. And I don't think we've solved that as a democracy. You know, when we started back in the 18th century, there was a lot of room for private discourse. And I have this one little fantasy that maybe we'll get back there because we'll get to the point where deep fakes are so easy to do that a video of someone saying something, everyone will say, oh yeah, well, it's a video. Who believes that? But that's just my little fantasy. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I actually made some slides about some things that I get commonly as an answer to this question, and one is misinformation. And I want to say that we've always had misinformation. In fact, when I got into office, I got it by beating a woman whose chief deputy, also her daughter, got into trouble and had to leave her post because she put misinformation, election misinformation, out on the street in support of another candidate. So that's an example from my personal history, but there are also huge examples of misinformation, very dangerous misinformation. The Rosewood Massacre is one, a classic, alas, story of the massacre and destruction of a town because of an unsubstantiated rumors of rape of a white woman by a black man. That was in 1923. Another thing that people often say when I ask this question is they point to corruption of officials. And that also has been around for a long time. These are some incidents from recent history because that's what I know. I'm sure there are plenty of incidents from ancient history as well. And let me not get stuck here, but if you want to read this slide, just stop it and read it. Yeah, let me keep going. So the real question is, in my mind, is how good is good enough? We don't have a perfect democracy, but let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. How good is good enough? What are the metrics for a democracy? And this I want to also throw out to the audience.
Clearly, one of the metrics is and I think in terms of simple metrics, not because I want everything to be simple. I strongly believe that complexity, appreciated complexity, leads us in good directions. But having easily gathered data is probably useful for us. And so, how many people exercise the right to vote is going to be like way up my list on terms of what makes for a strong democracy.
I love the idea of easily gathered data because the last project I did, funded by the National Science Foundation and Verified Voting, was to collect federal election results by county from all across this country, the states, the territories, and the District of Columbia. And let me tell you, each jurisdiction has their own way of publishing and formatting, and it's a big job. It would be nice if it were a simple job. And when you start talking about other data, you know, how many people voted, that kind of thing, or how many records are in the voter registration list, all of that is very, very difficult. Yeah. What else? What else is a sign that your democracy is good enough?
I think if we feel, well, this gets me away from the metric piece.
That's okay.
But I think if we feel that government is responsive, so if, and that has to do with everything, you know, like trash getting picked up and potholes getting filled in the roads, and you know, and all of the standard stuff of, you know, do we have a functioning community? That is no small piece of, are we doing this hard work of having a functioning government in a way that is somehow good enough to allow us to live our lives, you know, in some constructive way.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not sure this is an easy metric, and maybe it's not a metric at all, but
That's okay. Yeah.
but standardizing voting laws and procedures, which I believe is what the Voting Act is attempting to do, should, and with input from all the stakeholders, should be a centerpiece of this, and establishing not only common procedures, rules, and regulations, but how you judge those should be part of the discussion. So
Yeah.
that both in feel like, okay, it was fair and square according to what we all agreed to. But
Yeah.
that's
You know,
probably
when I first got interested in how can you tell whether an election was fair, it was just after the 2004 election, and at that time, one of the things, the obvious questions was, well, why doesn't the Carter Center, which observes and judges elections around the country, so they observe and they judge them fair or not, why can't the Carter Center observe American elections? And the answer was because American elections do not meet the basic criteria of the Carter Center, which at the time were that they should be conducted by nonpartisan actors, that they should be standardized across the country. And there was one more that it doesn't come to mind at the moment. So yeah. I want to tell you my answers that I've come to. One is I will know that our democracy is good enough when people choose voting over violence. And the second one is that any group can organize its way to influence and resources commensurate with its size. So if you have 50 people in a town of 3,000, you ought to be able, who agree on something, they ought to be able to get some influence and some resources towards that thing. And by that standard, well, US democracy is at the very least at risk, if not perhaps already not good enough. So do we choose voting over violence? Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that the events of January 6, 2021 were a shot across the bow from the violence faction. How big they are, we don't really know. How whether this is, you know, an apex of violence or whether it's a sign of worse things to come, we don't really know. But that's to me says we are, our democracy is right now not good enough. And on the subject of, do groups have influence commensurate with group size? again, I look at the United States and I see that that is not true. We have 2 million, about 2 million people in jails and prisons who effectively cannot vote. We have about the same number, it's hard to know the exact number, but on the same order of magnitude of number of farm workers in the United States, many of whom are not citizens and cannot vote and cannot have influence commensurate with the size of the group. There are real discussions today also about children and about animals. So this can go off in a lot of directions. But even with the most conservative notion of who should be judged as an adult or as a being with the with the power to to participate in democracy, even with the most conservative meaning of that, we're not. We fail that test in the United States. And again, going back to the founding of the country, the number of people who were excluded from the ballot, whether by law or by process, was well, I mean, there were all the people who were enslaved. Yeah. Okay. So I think also we have a new threats to democracy that come from climate change, and that however good our democracy is right now, it is about to be tested and tested and tested and tested more because of the instability in the world, and I believe, and even within the United States, the growing instability. So what to do? Is there anything to do about this? I think there is, and I have come to believe very strongly that democracy requires local relationships. Even the mechanisms of voting require local relationships, and I'll talk about that more in the question period if people want to hear more. But certainly you need to know your neighbors in order to really organize. Organizing really happens, there's an in-person base of it. So I would urge all of you, if you want to help democracy in the United States, start small, start local, start in your local community. So there's my prepared remarks, and I'm really looking forward to questions and discussion.
Fantastic, Dr. Singer. Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and stop sharing and introduce the group. You have all met our speaker, Dr. Singer. Also with us from the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley is Cecilia Babkirk, our treasurer. And my name is Robert Rushton Hurley. I am the charter president and the program's chair. So to start us into the questions, one of the things about public service is that it is service, right? When we think about what Rotarians do, we think about, oh, okay, we're raising money to address this need. There's a homelessness issue over here. We're trying to build a park over here for this reason. We're connecting with a club in another part of the world in order to address a challenge that is faced there, perhaps. So in that sense, we have a fairly narrowed vision of what service is that often does not include politics. And so if we're talking about public service as a method of service, you have worked with people across the spectrum. Are there particular examples of people who brought their philosophy or their actions to their political positions that you found especially impressive or even innovative?
Yeah, so I would like to think I'm on that list. That was my aspiration. And one of the things I learned is how difficult it is to get anything done, if that's what you bring to it. I have tremendous respect for Barack Obama on that score. Who else has brought service to that's the question? Who has brought service to?
Whose philosophy and actions regarding public service have particularly impressed you? I think of George Bush Sr. in talking about how he, encouraged people to think of service. There's just a lot of people in a lot of positions who seem to inspire common folks like us to think, I can do more for my community.
Yeah. No question, the leadership of the Black church. No question. I had the honor of hearing Al Sharpton address an enormous congregation in Philadelphia, and there is no question that it is all about service. It is all about service, and it's about when the clergy or people like Al Sharpton, or even just the line, kind of the clergy in the small Black churches, when they talk about politics, it is politics in service of service. So that's really the most service driven. Those are the people. Yeah.
Good deal. Are there examples of people that you have worked with or worked or met who did things that surprised you in terms of their innovative approach to involving people in service to the community in any form?
People I've personally worked with. I wish you'd given me this question in advance.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah, because I know that there are. Chuck Pinocchio was a candidate for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania in 2006 within the Democratic Party, and is now the head of Healthcare for All Pennsylvania, and has in terms of innovation. So
for example, we recently had David Plotz of the Slate Political Gabfest talk to us about CityCast, his business, and the desire to get people involved in their communities and to learn about their communities from people who have a particular love for what they do through podcasts. And I think of that as a use of technology that is especially good for getting people to think past the competitive team thing, our team or their team, and much more in the space of, hey, there is this issue that's out there, and I'm talking about it because it needs to be talked about, right? Blah blah blah, right? And then that to me is the kind of thing that has a lot of long-term potential when it is not simply partisan.
Right. So there is a company called Nation Builder that provides organizing tools for anybody who wants to organize around anything. I mean, it's a for-profit company. You have to pay, but they were first out of the gate in tying things to social media and creating a tool that was easy to use for anyone who wanted to organize a little nation of people to attack some problem or other. So that's definitely a prime example for me. I always think, I hear you talking about individual action, and one of the things that I learned in my 10 years in the mud and muck is that group action is what gets things done at the political level. So at the level of policy, at the level of public resources, it's always about groups, always, always, always. And that's in fact one of the things that, as a, sorry for my dog, Molly, hush, leave it. I came in, thinking that, the when I face a ballot, it's like an SAT test, you even fill in the little circles. And if I don't know who to vote for, I shouldn't vote in that contest. If I hadn't done all my research, it's all me, individual. What I learned in politics in Philadelphia organizing is that politics is a group sport, and the power is in people who vote in blocks. And to have people vote in a block, every single individual is not responsible for making an informed choice. Every individual in the block is responsible for supporting the block. And there's a tension, of course, between that and what happens when a bunch of people within the block actually disagree with the direction the block is going, and that's a really hard tension. There's no escaping that tension. But I, as ward leader in the 8th ward in Philadelphia, it's one of the largest wards. There was another ward, the 50th ward, which was about the same size, a little smaller actually, but the 50th ward, the leader of the 50th ward had much more influence on policy than the 8th ward did, and the reason was that they voted as a block. So yeah,
I apologize for that.
please.
Isn't voting as a block effectively a result of having made your case well to the members of the block? So if you think about, like a union in an area where people's cultural values do not quite align with what the union wants, or if you're thinking about the potential of a party to take a position that is at odds with with this group, like effectively the block won't vote as a block, and therefore it didn't work effectively as a block. So the need for good communication on the front end actually dictates the effectiveness of the block. Or is that naive?
I think that's unfortunately, I think that's naive.
Okay.
Because people don't have time. People who are working hard for a living don't have time to even hear the any subtlety of communication. And this is a real tension for me, because the best way to have a block is to have a culture of you just vote with the block, a culture of loyalty to the leader. I mean, that's what I saw in Philadelphia. There may well be other ways to do it. I hope there are. But the culture of loyalty to the leader is absolutely the most effective way to create a block. And this is one of the reasons that corruption is endemic in politics, is that it is effective. So I counsel everybody to read George Washington Plunkett of Tammany Hall. He has a lovely series of essays in which he says things like, how can I convince a young man to work hard for the party if I can't promise him a job at the end of it? And this is a very deep thing to say. And if you don't want to read George Washington Plunkett, read some things that Abraham Lincoln said about how to organize. He understood the importance of finding out, if you're responsible for, say, a small committee of people, and you want to be part of an effective political bloc, what you have to do is figure out the people who aren't in line. You have to figure out who they listen to, and you have to find a way, your best way to convince them to get in line with the bloc. And it's not about the best idea winning. And this is a huge, essential paradox of politics, which is that to get anything done, you have to organize people, and they have to mostly stay in line. And on the other hand, to figure out what ought to be done, you have to listen to people and understand where they are. This was what I hoped for myself as a politician, that I wasn't able to accomplish. But it's an essential paradox because it's the ballot is not an SAT test, not at all.
So I know Cecilia has her question ready. Go ahead, Cecilia.
Okay, so I guess bringing it all down to the bottom line is, how do you get people to start talking to each other again? We in Rotary should have the perfect platform for that, because not every Rotarian is a raving liberal. Including people in the leadership who are very adamant about their position. And I think even though, yes, on the local level, which is each of us in our community, you want to do that, but there's this other community which consists of multiple communities around an area where there is a chance to start a dialogue, and often with other people who are leaders in the community. I'm not sure how we do that in today's world.
So, look, I'm not sure I know exactly either, but I would say start by inviting a bunch of people to have some drinks and have some instruments in the room so they can play music together. Or, uh, I mean, for
Yeah,
real.
good
That I
point.
think is the thing to do. Art, theater, things that people do, or work together. Now, this is because our country is so, it's not just ideologically divided, it's geographically divided.
Yeah.
But if there is a way to get people out, cleaning up their, a local piece of public land, um, planting flowers, whatever it is, some local project whose value has nothing to do with politics. And
That's an
people
interesting
working
point.
together, and presumably there's a virtual way, there may be a virtual way to do that. Um,
Mhm.
but, give them something they got to do and keep them busy enough with that they can't, distract, and maybe some relationships are created.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of our time for the recording. One of the benefits of engaging our speakers in a recording is that you get to keep talking to them if they have time afterwards, that kind of thing, right? So what I'll do is I'll hand it back to Dr. Singer for a final word in just a minute. But for all of you who have joined us watching this recording, we thank you for taking your time to be intrigued, hopefully, by the different things that we share, whether that's the set of ideas that get tossed back and forth in our programs, or the inspirational video, or the learn something new, or the image that Keith shares with us, the humor that Shags puts together. All of the different things that make up our meetings, we hope are things that in some way inspire you to think about your potential to do something more for your community. Because if what we are going to do is have a body politic that essentially celebrates the opportunity to do interesting things together, and then that is surely part of the foundation. We welcome your comments in the section at the bottom, the discuss forum, DISQUS, down towards the bottom of the page. You're welcome to follow the links to learn more. And in this case, we have from Dr. Singer books that she would recommend for further reading. We hope you will take a look at those. Also, definitely let us know you were here via the attendance form that is just a hair down. And we would love to be able to send you a little note that just says, hey, thank you for attending. If you are a visiting Rotarian making up a miss, that should allow you to meet your club's requirements for doing so. And if not, just let us know and we'll send you something a little longer. With that, I'd like to hand it back to Dr. Singer for the final word. And again, Dr. Singer, thank you so much for engaging with us in a complex and fascinating program.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you all for the service you do. That is really what it makes our world tick, and it gives us all hope for the future. Plus, as I'm sure you know, it's fun. So my final word would be, again, stop looking at the national level of politics, and instead get involved in some small project in your community. And I also would recommend don't rule out small local politics. In fact, I mean, one of the nice things about Pennsylvania, which is where I became really political, is that there are lots of really local small offices you could run for. And if you're in a state or territory or place like that, where you can run to be, on your local election board or whatever it is, do it. There's nothing like running for office. If you are at all extroverted. But get involved, and don't reject partisan politics because of the ugliness you see in it. try getting involved at a very local level and see if you can get something done.
Wonderful. Everyone, we will see you next week.